another plug in, and don't forget to register for part 2 of this series. As I was preparing for this topic, I couldn't help but reflect on the phrase, "do not boil the ocean." And so we're going to take on what we can realistically cover in our time today without going too far into the weeds of the administrative aspects of affiliations, but I think helpful enough to give you a good idea of what the health system, hospital side of administration of a relationship looks like. With the reminder that you can always phone a friend if you have questions or ideas after our time today. So I'm going to go on to the next slide, but I would like to learn a little bit more about your organization's affiliations. And so while I'm going through this next slide, in the chat, if you wouldn't mind commenting on the number of medical school affiliations that your hospital or health system is engaged in, if you know. So while you're dropping that in the chat, I wanted to give you a little bit of background on Baylor Scott and White. There are a lot of Baylors in the state of Texas. My favorites are the Baylor Bears in Waco, but an additional favorite of mine is Baylor Scott and White. During my tenure here at this organization for over 18 years, I've witnessed the growth of our organization through the addition of hospitals and clinics and healthcare systems to where we are today. And as an integrated healthcare system, we will be 10 years old in October, formed by the merger of Legacy Baylor Healthcare, which is located in our North Texas region, and Scott and White Healthcare, which is geographically in our Central Texas region. Prior to our merger, each legacy organization had 100 years of existence as well. So our patient populations are a true reflection of the local communities that we serve. And it's important to our mission to serve healthcare nationally and our fellow Texans, particularly through education. As a system, we do not have a traditional university-based medical school, and we are not a single community health system either. And I'll share here in a few slides that we have regional academic medical centers throughout our system that operate independently of medical school ownership while maintaining medical school affiliations. The definition of our independent academic medical centers, and in fact, 4 of our medical centers are members of the AIAMC. We're really in the business of health professions education because we want to be a part of the solution for our workforce shortage, plus contribute in meaningful ways to the pipeline of trainees for the future. Next slide, please. Health professions education is also not foreign to our organization. We have over 100 years of experience. I will say, though, that we are still learning how to navigate through current trends and changes that have occurred over the years of how to get better and how to strengthen our affiliations with medical schools, including the administration of those affiliations. I just want to call out some of the major milestones here of our history with medical schools. A unique call out back in the early 1900s, then Baylor University College of Medicine, what we know now as Baylor College of Medicine, was located, its home was in Dallas back in the early 90s before they moved to Houston in 1943. And we trained medical students then as well in Dallas. Now, our first modern affiliation with a medical school dates back to 1974 when we affiliated with Texas A&M's School of Medicine in Temple, Texas, which is located in Central Texas. It's expanded over the years, and I'll share with you a little bit more detail about that affiliation shortly. In 2019, we announced an affiliation with the Burnett School of Medicine at Texas Christian University, which is located in Fort Worth. west of Dallas. And this affiliation was largely driven to support growth in our graduate medical education programs, in addition to the start of the new medical school at TCU. And in 2020, in late 2020, we announced our most recent affiliation with Baylor College of Medicine, where we have intended to start Baylor College of Medicine's first regional medical campus in Temple. And we're very proud that in the last 2 weeks, we actually welcomed the first cohort of 40 students in Temple at the regional medical campus. Next slide, please. Okay, so a little bit about our geography and our medical school affiliations, a little bit more detail. So today we do have 3 major medical school affiliations, training over 400 medical students annually. Once our Baylor College of Medicine enrollment is complete in 2027, we will be training nearly 560 future physicians. The Burnett School of Medicine is at TCU, is located in our Fort Worth market. The curriculum for the students here it's a longitudinal integrated curriculum model, and we train close to 60% of their students in the clinical setting. In the Temple market, look at a little bit further south, our newest affiliation with Baylor College of Medicine. This regional medical campus will be delivering all 4 years of the medical school curriculum. So years 1 through 4, all in Temple as well. And you'll notice that we also have one of our Texas A&M regional sites is in Temple. So with Texas A&M, we have 4 unique regional campuses. In Temple, we are sunsetting the Temple campus and expanding our other markets. In our other markets. Now, what's interesting about our Texas A&M affiliation in College Station, this curriculum, the students in College Station are part of Texas A&M's integrated longitudinal curriculum. In Round Rock, near Austin, south of Temple, where we also train Texas A&M students. We train only in the clinical setting as a couple of clerkships and electives. And in Dallas, where our major Texas A&M site is, we provide education for 2nd year through 4th year medical students. So that is the portfolio, if you will, of our undergraduate medical education programs in our health system. Now, we also have 4 GME sponsoring institutions and 7 teaching hospitals for graduate medical education, training over 900 residents and fellows in over 60 programs. Speaking to why we do education, we have seen ranges of 10 to 30% of our graduating medical students training on our campuses, entering our GME programs, and upwards of 25% of our residents, graduating residents, joining our medical group. This is really critical and I think supportive of our mission and the why we do medical education. Now, while the geographical span of our programs is vast, it can create very unique opportunities for multiple affiliations, in addition to some challenges that I think we've worked really nicely at with our medical school partners. Next slide, please. So medical education at our organization truly has been an organic growth over the last, if you will, timeline, as I've shared with you, of our history. And much of it has been regionally located and developed at our teaching hospitals. Now, if you did the math on the previous slide, you may have counted that we have 5 different educational curriculum models that we are implementing at our health system with our medical school partners. And that exist in our system. This is great. I mean, there's a lot of diversity in the training of medical students in our health system. What we've learned and where we are moving towards, if you will, is that in the last few years, we are making strides towards enterprise alignment in medical education. What this means for us is that while we want each of our regional campuses to maintain its unique programming and distinctiveness and independence, we want to also coordinate and optimize efficiencies across our enterprise and reduce variabilities. And we think this is a strength for our affiliations as well, and we'll strengthen those affiliations. This effort has been led by our System Chief Academic Officer, my boss, Dr. Alex Aroliga, and even my administrative role supporting the enterprise approach to education is only 15 months old. It's a new position to our organization supporting these efforts to really optimize our system affiliations and education programs while still maintaining regional independence and uniqueness. The success of this enterprise approach is really important to us. Some of you may be operating at a single affiliation, single medical school site, a single hospital. We've seen trends growingly across the nation in horizontal integration of hospitals into health systems, and it may be more common for health systems to expand into education through mergers and acquisitions. Really and truly, here's what we're trying to do today with our academic affiliations. Internally in our health system, we want to make sure that the left hand and the right hand are talking, that the left hand and the right foot are talking. And what this looks like from boots on the ground is that our technology teams, our operations teams, our finance teams are horizontally talking, and that vertically our leadership is engaged from the CEO to our frontline leaders. We believe this is really critical for a successful academic affiliation. You really need to have your house in order to have an external relationship be successful. And I don't really think it's a nice to have. I think it's a really must have for the administration of a medical school clinical enterprise affiliation. Next slide, please. So one of the beliefs that we have at Baylor Scott and White is that education is an asset of our healthcare system, and I suspect many of you all believe the same in your organizations. Our institutional commitment supports that belief that education is an asset. Because it's an asset, we believe that we have to tend to our affiliations and really nurture them. And so before we enter into any affiliation, medical school or university-based allied health programs, any type of affiliation, or if we're doing a check-in on existing relationships, we really focus on evaluating the synergies. Aligning those principles is a priority. And I think in my experience in the last year of being in this role is really important for the success of implementing administrative aspects of any affiliation. Ultimately, the value proposition for a medical school clinical relationship is to ensure optimum value as it is delivered to the learners, for the faculty, and ultimately for the patients that we take care of. These are our guiding principles, and I suspect many of them align with your own. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just very high level are the needs of our patients and our communities, making sure that we have a workforce pipeline. Importantly, exposure of our trainees to the health and clinical learning environment. How we collaborate with our community members and community clinics and service learning, and then also financial stewardship and making sure our partnerships support the financial investment in medical education and faculty development. Next slide, please. So one of the things I wanted to share with this group that I thought we've learned has been very helpful with our most recent affiliation is that while, and I've commented that the development of our affiliations with medical schools has very much been organic and a natural regional expansion of medical education. Our most recent affiliation with Baylor College of Medicine was driven by a slightly different approach that was very deliberate and systematic. So if you're considering entering into a new affiliation, this process may be one to consider. We found success with it. Back in 2018, after an internal study on institutional academics at our organization, we opened up a prospectus, essentially a call out to over 30 schools of medicine in the United States, and invited them to submit applications to be potential new medical school partners with us. We established a review and selection process, and from there we went through and selected Baylor College of Medicine as our next medical school affiliate. That process then took an additional 6 months to go through the affiliation development and execution of an agreement, of a master affiliation agreement. Why was this process important to us? Well, I think that the clinical partner was able to drive and align common vision and realistic goals with the medical school partner. We were very intentional, very systematic, had core factors that we evaluated when we considered other schools' applications. And I would add that the administration of our affiliation from the beginning has been a driver in the successful, I would say, implementation of the campus. We devoted time, resources, and many preliminary conversations to define a common vision, clear goals, and clarity of purpose of the affiliation between Baylor Scott & White and Baylor College of Medicine. It may sound easy, it may sound easy, not necessarily easy in practice, but the rewards have truly, I think, been very visible in our implementation of a new regional medical campus. And so I really think one of the tips to success in the administration of a medical school health system affiliation is really developing consensus on the administration of the relationship and the shared goals and mission of the affiliation. Next slide, please. So the next few slides, we're going to spend a little bit of more time on kind of the nitty-gritty on affiliation agreements. I'm not going to dive into governance language and terms, et cetera, but I do want to just give a very high level perspective on documentation and how affiliations are memorialized, if you will. There are two types of agreements that govern an overall affiliation, and you may have experience with these, notably a master affiliation, which I think ties the knot between two or three or more organizations, and then operational agreements. And this is where the hard work really happens to help deliver the education and the educational programming and operations required to execute a campus. There are a couple of different versions of affiliation agreements that you may be familiar with. One type is a customized master affiliation agreement that's designed for unique partnerships. Another type of affiliation that could be used between a hospital and a medical school is the use of the AAMC Uniform Clinical Training Affiliation Agreement. This is commonly used across the country, and it can be incorporated and implemented generally also. Probably, I would say more so when the clinical site is the primary and sole kind of clinical training structure of a affiliation. When we consider operational agreements, there are many different types of operational agreements that could be implemented depending on the needs of a campus. And we'll go into a few examples on the next slide. Listed here are, great, thanks, Mindy. Listed here are, this is a non-comprehensive variety of questions that could be asked to support the types of agreements that would be needed to establish and govern an affiliation. One of my tips here that I want to offer is that highly encourage everyone to coalesce a strong team of people smarter than you to answer these questions. I rely very heavily on my legal friends, our business and operations friends, our finance team and medical education group, IT, and our faculty leadership to really help us answer these questions. The administrative facets of these areas can become convoluted and very complex and intertwined very quickly. And so I think we couldn't do it without a strong team, a diverse team that represents membership from a variety of different aspects of our hospital and health system to be able to implement a strong medical school education program on our campuses. Next slide, please. So what I've attempted to do here is depict on this slide an overview of some of the common administrative structures of an affiliation. Governance speaks to the strategy, mission, and financial aspects of the relationship. Often these are defined in the master affiliation agreements that describe the terms and provisions of the relationship. These are the do's and don'ts. Organizational structures and financial aspects of the relationship are closely tied at the governance level. If any funds are flowing between the organizations, if funding agencies or philanthropy are involved, the terms and requirements are really best defined at the governance level. The management level of an affiliation may involve many more operational requirements and agreements because fortunately or unfortunately, there are rules, there are laws and requirements and regulations that just require them. And speaking to earlier one of Brandon's slides about accreditation, ultimately we believe as a health system and the clinical partner that we have a responsibility and a requirement to fulfill and support our medical schools partner, medical schools requirements to meet accreditation requirements. And so oftentimes the management structure is where the rubber hits the road, if you will, to make sure that the implementation occurs successfully so that the learners can engage in the academic and clinical environment seamlessly and successfully. There are many different teams that we work with to implement a medical school program, and that may require different service type of agreements with facilities and learning resources such as the library, use of study space, security and protection on the campus, student services, information technology. These are all just a broad range of areas that really will be dependent on the type of curriculum implemented at the clinical affiliate site and any necessary requirements for accreditation, and whether that be LCME accreditation or SAC-CUC accreditation as well. Next slide, please. So the take-home message for this slide is that the organizational structure and model of a medical school and clinical enterprise can take on varied levels of integration. And the role of the chief academic officer is really a critical one. The chief academic officer serves as a connector and an integrator of the relationship. This figure goes back to literature from 20 years ago, depicting 8 ideal organizational models of very high integration between the clinic clinical and academic enterprise to very low integration between the two organizations. Subsequently, you can have within those structures very low to high authority of the chief academic officer. I'd encourage you to just take a minute and maybe reflect on where your organizational structure may fit into these models, and maybe drop into the chat where you see the level of integration at your organization between the clinical and academic enterprise, and possibly the role of the chief academic officer. I'll give you a personal example at Baylor Scott and White. Our system CAO, my boss, has authority over the UME and GME programs that described earlier, and in a matrix relationship has responsibility to the clinical regional leadership of those programs at each of the sites. Interestingly, with our new affiliate, Baylor College of Medicine, he's also the founding regional dean. And so he has a role with the medical school organizational structure as well. So for our three medical school affiliations, the level of integration is different for each partnership, and the role of the chief academic officer on the medical school side and may be different as well. So it's just kind of a unique dynamic, if you will, between our different affiliations. Next slide, please. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but I thought it was fun, if you will, to learn from our history and how we've evolved over the last 40 years. These are actually from our library archives, and it was really unique to look and explore how we have memorialized affiliation relationships over the last decades. What's interesting on the right side of this slide is what the original structure, organizational structure of our relationship with Texas A&M School of Medicine was. And it involved multiple medical schools. It involved a clinical system. Also involved various committees and faculty relationships. And so I think just generally, we've really learned a lot over the years, and continue to learn in modern time what works and what may not have worked, and vice versa. I just thought it was a fun look back in history. All right, next slide, please. So admittedly, one of the realizations that I had as I was preparing for this webinar was that because we have confidentiality terms in our master affiliation agreements, some of the details are protected. And so while I can't dive into a lot of the nuts and bolts of our governance structures and our organizational structures, I can share with you generally how our affiliations are organized from a health system view. Affiliations with a governance structure that works for both parties will really only further the success of the relationship. That balance of governance can be very delicate. I think from a hospital and health system perspective, we're probably used to having more control of our domains, and that can complicate structures, possibly with any type of medical school ownership or governance over those domains. I think that the governance and operations models that are implemented to support the administration of a relationship should ensure that both the clinical and administrative leadership stay engaged in a very meaningful way. And I think that structure will provide a platform where diverse groups of staff, administrative staff, faculty, and medical staff can really participate in both clinical and operational decisions. I wanted to kind of share with you how we structure our governance and management operations with one of our partners, Texas A&M. Just as a reminder, we have 4 regional campuses with Texas A&M. And at a governance level, we have engaged many members of our system leadership, including our CEO, our Chief Academic Officer, our CFO, and even our Chief Legal Officer. And they often call on members of the management team and senior leader team to support discussions they may be having and activities they may be having with our medical school partner, Texas A&M. These same senior leaders, such as myself and our regional deans and our finance leaders, will also provide oversight and guidance at the local and regional level. And so while our regional campuses may independently be having conversations with the medical school partner, they collectively come together in system councils to coordinate and identify synergies and opportunities to align efforts together as well, so that we're all operating on the same terms and with the same guidance overall as a system. Next slide, please. So whatever form an affiliation may take, I think the involvement of medical education comes with a cost for the clinical partner. And if conflicts brew and occur between organizations, they most definitely will over money. And, as I was preparing this slide, I thought we could probably have an entire webinar on funds flow. So maybe our programming committee can consider that. But the financial considerations, I think, in any relationship really need to be considered very early on in an affiliation. Don't leave this for the end as an afterthought. And we revisit our financial obligations regularly in our existing affiliations as well. We've also developed a framework for how we negotiate our affiliate funds flow so that we produce a agreed upon financial arrangement that is fair, that is respectful to each party's contributions, and that's really transparent and centrally coordinated across our organization and with our different partners. I think the terms of the relationship and engagement of our internal stakeholders is really critical. I wanted to really leave this here for you all because I think that this is a really, significant aspect of the clinical medical school relationship that really provides many foundational aspects for success of its administration. But I don't want to spend too much time on it because I think it can get very complex very quickly. So next slide and last slide. So we have some time for questions. I just wanted to kind of wrap this up. I've shared some very different tips along the way for where we found success in our relationships with our medical school partners. And I think this is where the rubber really hits the road. And I think it's important that we have that you have your house in order, that each organization has their house in order, and making sure that everybody has skin in the game, from the CEO to frontline leaders, along with developing a very strong team to help support the implementation of the affiliation. We're really focused on a very disciplined operating model that supports the strategic goals of both our health system and hospitals and our medical school partners over the long term. And we want to address issues of clinical integration and the alignment and governance of our medical groups and faculty practices. These matters can be the Achilles heel of an affiliate relationship, and one that I did not spend really any time covering. Maybe it could be another webinar as well, but I think that that's really critical for success as well. I think it's fair to say to expect conflict and manage for success as well. Organizational conflicts in complex and I think collaborative relationship are commonplace. We've learned that being honest, listening really well, and reminding yourselves of a shared common goal will be very helpful in the implementation of all of the various administrative aspects of an affiliation. Ultimately, culture is important, and I think together with both partners, leaders, and frontline team members engaged, the administrative side of an affiliation can be successful ultimately for our learners, for our faculty, and the patients that we serve. So that concludes my part of the webinar on the various different administrative aspects of a medical school relationship.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Hania. Thank you to Brandon. A really excellent presentation. And I'm struck by, before I joined the AIAMC 20 years ago, I was an administrative director of medical education. And back in that day, there was just a boilerplate, boilerplate agreement. And if the med school came to us with their own boilerplate agreement, we're like, no, this is our boilerplate agreement. Wow. Things have really evolved wonderfully so, and great need to do so. And I'm really struck by the strategic approach and relationship, building that relationship and building that partnership. And it really aligns with the AIAMC, that tricycle analogy of the big front wheel is patient care. Back two wheels are medical education and research. So really at the end of the day, if we all agree that we want to provide the best patient care we can while providing education for the future learners, everybody wins. So that's a wonderful approach. If anyone has questions, you're welcome to unmute your lines or put something into chat. The other just little tidbit I wanted to share before we adjourn in a few moments, the AIAMC, our 70-some members, have 114 affiliation agreements with 85 different US medical schools. And I'm sure all of them have a story to tell, and again, we'll greatly benefit from the words of wisdom of this webinar.
Well, and I think I would add to that. I don't think, any two are the same. And but I think that diversity is, I think, important. And I think we can find strength in the uniqueness of all of those affiliations.
Absolutely. Our members that have multiple affiliations, I'm sure would be very quick to agree with you that they're not all alike. They're not all from a particular template. But if you go into it with the strategy and relationship building and patient care, they're all going to be very successful, even though they may look a bit different from one another. We do have a question from Joe Portuguese with Advent Health Orlando. Did you use a consulting group to help sort your potential academic partners?
Hi, Dr. Portuguese. Great question. One that I failed to share in my review of that slide. So we did, and we used our friends at ECG. And ECG has been a firm that we've worked with very closely for many of our medical school relationships and strategy, but also graduate medical education, and really being very intentional and thoughtful in our approaches and strategy for growth in medical education. They bring a lens in seeing kind of what the national trends are and helping us in that regard as well. You're welcome, Joe.
Thank you so much. Shelley Monks from Texas Health Resources would like to know, if you could go back in time, is there anything that you would have approached differently?
That's a good question. I think in my role, I will say in the last year and a half, I think there may be aspects that I would approach a little bit more differently. I think as an organization, if I could speak from the organization's perspective, intentional and I think if we're intentional and very thoughtful in the development of programming, and I would say this is not just for UME, but also for graduate medical education. I don't know if it's differently, but I would have done more of that. And I think that is really an important behavioral change for an organization to approach relationships very strategically and intentionally. And I think maybe just doing more of that, and not because we didn't do that well, but I think when I think about our allied health affiliations, we train over 2,000 students from an allied health perspective and have affiliations with 200 plus schools in allied health training. Trying to work through that vast number can be very hard. And so that may be what I would do a little bit more of.
Wonderful. Making that intentionality really top of mind. Ashley, did you have a question?
I did. Kind of actually I was just about to ask that question around allied health and, navigating, relationships and partnerships kind of between medicine, between allied health. We know that, one of our challenges is that, of course, some of the core rotations, places where medical students want to be are also places where nurse practitioner students, PA students want to be. And so, that can create some challenges in trying to balance that. And so I was just curious how you, link in with other groups and, how allied health fits into kind of your overarching structures that you were talking about.
Yeah. Great question, Ashley. So in the last probably 5 years, one of our goals has been to centralize allied health agreements. And the centralization, I think, is important for streamlining our relationships and negotiations on those relationships. But I think what it's also done is give us a greater awareness of the activities and education that's happening across our system. And what that awareness does is it allows us to manage the training of those learners very closely with the regions, and allows us to kind of shift our resources where we need them to be. That's from the allied health perspective. I think want to give an example of our physician assistant programs, which when we have rotators between physician assistant programs and our medical students, we want to make sure that the clinical learning environment is not overly saturated. And what we do is we work very closely with our partners on capacity, on rotations, and then working with our faculty to make sure that they have the adequate time and resources to be preceptors and teachers. What that requires us to do is to move, if you will, some of our rotations to different geographies within a region. And we have the luxury of doing that in an organization as large as ourselves, where we have, close to 200 clinics, as an example. And we can move some trainees around, but sometimes it involves some hard conversations and sunsetting of other affiliations as well.
Wonderful. I know we're at the top of the hour, and Jen Augustin from Health Partners, I apologize for not seeing your question, and Hania can work with me after if she'd be willing. If you could go, I'm sorry, would you be willing to share the prospectus that you issued to the schools of medicine? Even just maybe, if not the innards of it, but I imagine like the headers or the main categories. So that's something, Hania, you can consider and get back to me. I know we're at the top of the hour. Our part 2 of this series, I misspoke at the top. It's actually October 5th, not the 6th, October 5th at 12 noon Eastern. I do want to remind you that the slides and recording from today will be posted on our website, and Mindy will be sending you those links. Do remember to complete the brief evaluation, and at the conclusion of the evaluation, you'll be prompted to access your CME credit if that's something you're interested in pursuing. So with that, I very much want to thank our speakers today. I thank Brandon Hunter. I thank Dr. Hania Janek. I thank all of you for taking time out of your busy day. And again, be sure to share this recording with your colleagues who could not join us live today. Thanks, everyone.